My name is Shane Joseph, and I'm not coming to you today as the publisher of Blue Denim Press, but as the author. And with me are two fellow authors who are going to be discussing the subject of fate in literature and life. Now let's actually meet the two other authors. Just give me a second here. We have Liz Torlée and
Hi, everyone.
Sharon A. Crawford, who are visiting today to discuss this very interesting topic. So we'll be back to them shortly, but let me set this up for you. So the title of this talk is called The Rune and Sixth Sense. And it may rhyme with the classic novel, The Moon and Sixpence. But I can assure you that we will not be talking about Somerset Maugham or Paul Gauguin, but about an unseen person called fate. At some point in all of our lives, we have probably said, it was fated, or it must have been fate, when referring to a lucky or even an unlucky break, a strange coincidence, or an unusual set of circumstances. Even if you go back to the classics, a couple of examples come to mind. Oedipus, who is destined to kill his father and marry his mother, no matter what he does to avoid his fate. Fate will have its way with Oedipus. And then we have Shakespeare's Hamlet, who says, "The time is out of joint, O cursed spite, that I was ever born to set it right." Poor Hamlet. He was destined to be embroiled in Denmark's rottenness and try to set things right, despite his reluctance. The theme of fate has featured extensively in literature. And I'm not referring to the magic realism, surrealism, or fantasy genres where ghosts and fate pop up on every page almost. I'm referring to mainstream realist fiction and nonfiction written today. And that's what we will be discussing tonight. Sometimes a fateful incident, or what we call an inciting incident, forms the premise that gets a novel going and gives rein to what an author is most preoccupied with, that eternal question, what if and what then? I'll give you another couple of examples. Gregor Samsa, in Kafka's novel The Metamorphosis, wakes up transformed into a giant insect. What will happen? And how will people react? And of course, we have Alice, who falls down a rabbit hole and discovers Wonderland. And Lucy enters a wardrobe and arrives in Narnia. And there are many examples like that in all these novels that we have read over the years. So let's go back to our two authors. Our two authors, Liz Torlée and Sharon A. Crawford. Liz's novel, The Way Things Fall, and Sharon's memoir, The Enemies Within Us, both have ominous undertones of fate at work. We will discuss three themes and have three short readings from these two authors, time permitting, that demonstrate these themes. And then we'll get into a discussion, and we hope there'll be questions from the audience. And if you do have questions, please put them in the Facebook comment section, and I'll be happy to relay them to the authors, and hopefully we will provide some answers, if we can, tonight. So let me go on to the three themes. The first theme, premonition. The second theme, fate taking control. And the third one, which is a very interesting one, fate and love. And if I can expand on that third theme a little bit, are we destined to meet one particular person? So that's our agenda for tonight. And let's crack on. So Liz, starting with you, what is premonition?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Shane. So I'm Liz. I've been fascinated by premonition, predestination, fate, ever since I was a child, and it's played a huge role in my life and actually in my writing. But to answer your question, what is it? I think it's sort of a nagging feeling, or in fact, a sixth sense. It can feel like a cold finger on your spine. And I'm sure we've all felt it. It's as though something is trying to send us a message. And we will pay attention to this because there's a stronger force at work out there that is trying to get us to do something or be somewhere it will be important in our lives. So I'm going to read you a scene from early in my novel where the main character, Rachel, she's an art critic. She's at a gallery looking at the work of a new painter, and this is a man she's never met. She's getting a really funny feeling when she looks at the paintings, as though she's actually been present in some of the scenes that he has painted. So something very creepy is unfolding. Stranded was the title of this painting. A man alone at the side of the road, his back to the viewer. Ahead of him, the road curved sharply upwards to the left. The man was in motion, leaning forward. His hair was blown back. Behind the trees that bordered the road, the sun was setting into the horizon. Rachel studied the colors, the leaves of the trees, the blue denim of the man's jeans, even the lowering sun, all had a faint grayish tinge, as though the colors of the day were bleeding away. There was a clandestine, mystical aura to the painting, as though something was about to go wrong. Stranded, perhaps it was only the title that kindled the strange sense of anxiety she was feeling. She turned away and then sharply back to look at it again, a technique she often used to recapture her dominant first impression. She felt a tiny squeeze in the pit of her stomach. Have I seen this before? Surely not. This was a first serious exhibition, and the painter was only just becoming known, but something was tugging at her memory. It was the next painting that took the breath right out of her. A stag, full grown, leaping out from a stand of trees. It was captured in full flight, its front hooves curled up tight against its huge body, its back legs stretched out behind, its heavy antlered head turning to stare at her. The animal was painted with photographic intensity, demanding all the attention. Rachel's whole body went rigid. How slowly that giant head turned, how angry and terrified those luminous eyes as they locked onto hers. She tried to step away, but she was frozen in time like the magnificent stag, a captive in the painter's field of vision. She was out there on that lonely country road, feeling the same chill of the evening air, not here in this gallery on this October evening. She pivoted slowly, fearing her knees would buckle. The room shifted back into focus, the voices rose to her ears, and she saw the painter. He was walking across the room, but turned as she was turning and looked directly at her, their eyes connected for the briefest moment in inexplicable recognition.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Liz. Now let's get to Sharon. So Sharon, what is premonition for you?
Premonition for me, as Liz mentioned, it is often a feeling, but often you don't realize it at the time, and you just sort of ignore it, and you don't really understand it or look back until you look back at it and see it's more like something that you discover in retrospect than when it's actually happening. And in my memoir, The Enemy Within Us, I've said it in the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s rather, when I was growing up. And I was the daughter of, only child of elderly parents. And also we lived in a small house in the East End of Toronto. And that house factors a lot into the fate part and other things going on in the book. And I will be reading something that will explain that. But this is just a tiny little house bungalow. There's not a fortress type house at all. But I sort of gave it big powers to protect us all. And the other thing is the story. I wrote my story with two people in mind, me as two people, the small child growing up and the senior citizen, me looking back. So it gives me the opportunity to look back at what was going on and what I didn't really know as a child. And what I'm going to read today is the beginning of the book, and it sort of deals with some of this with the house and some of the other things going on. And here we go. One late night, loud pounding on the front door wakes Mom, Daddy, and me. Like the servant Heeding the master, we all trip out to the front entrance. Mom turns on the veranda light and opens the door. Do you know this man? A police officer stands on our veranda. His right hand supports the shoulder of a disheveled man. Oh, home, the man says. The stench of his breath assaults my nostrils, and I jump back behind Mom, then peek out. The man's oily black hair lies flat. Night shadow and red blotches compete for attention on his face. He is bare from his neck to his dark trousers. Looking closer, I see blood dribbling down from a deep slice on his left cheek onto his chest. His eyes look bloodshot and vague. A black lump swells above his left eye. Home, he asks again. Sharon, go back into bed, Daddy says. Fascinated and repulsed, I lean out a little further. Who is this man? Oh, dear Lord, my mother says, it's Mr. Vargo from 2 doors down. Not from here. Our house is safe. Our house will protect us from harm. But can the bricks and mortar stop evil from hovering within? Maybe we should have taken this knock on the door as a warning.
Thank you, Sharon. That's so Sharon's version of encounter with premonition. That stranger obviously had something to bring them in their lives ahead. I'm going to share a little bit of an anecdote of mine where I use premonition. In my first novel, and I'm going to hold it up here so people can see it. I hope it's visible. It's called Redemption in Paradise. In that, I had a group of 6 tourists. Now, I wrote this back in 2004. Or I published it in 2004. I wrote it many years before that. A group of tourists, they're Westerners, 6 of them, traveling through war-torn Sri Lanka and visiting all the historic sites. They come up against incidents and situations that make them wonder whether they've been there before and whether they've had another life. And in that previous life, had they screwed things up? And here they were a second time around getting a chance to fix that. I situated the book in Sri Lanka because, being a Buddhist country, they strongly believe in reincarnation. So that gave the book some credibility, I guess, and kept it grounded. But at the same time, by adding that dimension of premonition, it enriched what would have normally been a 20th or 21st century novel set in the present. It gave it that added dimension. So I have used it, and I find that it is useful, and it does highlight some greater truths that we all aspire to reach. So having said that, I'm going to get to point number 2, or theme number 2, fate taking control. I'm going to start again with Liz. Can you give us an example of how that happens?
I can certainly, I think fate has taken control of my whole life, actually. I mean, I spent most of my career in advertising and market research. I had absolutely no intention of doing that, and in fact had quite a different idea, but a series of little incidents put me on a completely different course. And after 20 years, I even tried to get out of the industry, but I wasn't allowed. I always referred to it as the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And I think that was fate at work, basically. In my novel, there's a point where Rachel, the woman you met in the first reading, she can no longer influence the course of events. And she feels like she may as well just give up and follow destiny, whether she likes it or not. So in the short scene I'll read now, she feels compelled to call a man named Carl. He's an astronomer and an Egyptologist, and she used to love and work with him in Cairo in Egypt. She tried very hard to forget this man and everything about her life there. But a few months ago, 2 things happened. First, he sent her a ring, and it's the ring of the Eye of Horus, a very important symbol. Many believe it has protective powers. And the second is something happened that brought back a very tragic incident in her past, a very cowardly decision she made. Carl had always claimed that destiny is written in the stars. No one can get away from what fate has in store. And as she makes this call to him, after so many years of trying to stay away from him, she begins to feel that he was right. So it had taken all the courage she could muster to make the call. As she dialed, she had a strong conviction that Carl would be home, but her throat tightened when she heard his voice. "It's Rachel," was all she managed. A long pause. "So the time has come," he said. His words reached through the years and sank deep into her, filling the old spaces she thought were sealed off long ago. Her hand trembled as she pulled out the chair. She sat down clumsily. "There's something I need to talk to you about, but I haven't decided anything yet." "You decided to call," he said. "It was you who got in touch first. You sent the ring." "That was a long time ago. That was a time for caution," he said. She heard the rustle of papers being pushed aside. "We began a journey together. It was a powerful force that drove us. It cannot be stopped," he said. "But it did stop, Carl. I have a normal life here. I have a career. I bought a house, things that ordinary people do." He laughed. "Your normal life is a facade. You are not ordinary and you don't pretend well." She started to protest, but he cut her off. "You thought you could choose a different path, but it was merely a detour. You're feeling vulnerable now. I think that's why you're calling." Her hand gripping the phone felt numb. She switched to the other ear. "Look, I'd like..." "Rachel," he said, "you are welcome here again. Surely you've always known this." Was that true, she wondered? Was that in the end what she had wanted to hear? "I'd like to come to Cairo," she said, "just for a few days to talk things over." She pulled the paper clips on her desk in and out of their magnetized container, fighting the hot flush that crept across her neck. "Carl, why did you send me that ring? What do you mean, a time of caution?" She closed her eyes. "Have you lost all your interest in the stars, my love?" he said. It was very clear. "Something from the past has come back. I am right, yes."
Thank you. I like that guy, Carl. He's comes across to me as some kind of magical person, some kind of person from the past. Great, thank you. Before we get to Sharon, I'm just going to remind our viewers, and I'm seeing lots of comments now coming up in the feed. If you have any questions for us, please do type them in. We'd love to have your questions and like to engage with you in this discussion. So, Sharon, can you tell us about fate taking control?
Yeah, sometimes I'm talking about events that happen, things that happen that are inexplainable, they're inevitable. Are they bad luck? Are they maybe good luck? Or is it fate stepping in? I grew up, I was bullied by another girl I hung around with. She was my age. And my parents, they had their own way of helping me deal with it. My dad tried to protect me, and my mom tried to get me to stand up for myself. And the other thing that you have to know before I do this reading is that my parents being elderly, of course, illness was more dominant or more likely to happen because they were older. And in this story that I'm going to read this part, is it a case of the bully being an instrument for fate to come through in what she says to me and what happens, because it makes a big change in my life. And I'm going to read that passage now. "Your daddy has cancer." The bully comes at me. She's huffing and puffing as she walks along the sidewalk and tries to catch up to me. "Who? No. It's TB, you're lying." I glance at her over my shoulder, then my feet pick up the pace. "Nah, your parents lied. My mom said your daddy has cancer." She's lying. She's got to be lying. She seems closer to my back now, so I'll detour into the Holy Cross Church for solace. "My mother said it was TB. My mother doesn't lie. Please, God." I kneel on the wood hard kneelers and hang onto the pew in front of me. "Please, God, he had TB. My mother said so." My pleading does not carve consolation into my heart. Instead, betrayal is born, and it grows as offshoots that make no sense at the time.
Thank you, Sharon. That bully really comes across as almost like a soothsayer. She's able to predict and incite reactions from you right through your life with her. Thank you. So I'm going to give you one more anecdote from mine, and then I won't be talking about anything or any of my books in the third session on fate and love. But in this business of fate taking control, I'll talk about my most recent book. I talked about my first book, Redemption in Paradise, and now it's my most recent book, and I'll hold it up in case it can be seen. I'm not sure if you can see it. It's called Circles in the Spiral, which was published last year. And in that book, I tried to show the protagonist going through a series of events that happen in a circular fashion. You know, things that he's done incorrectly or haphazardly in the past. He gets another chance to do it again, and he seems to be going in circles. Everything that is undone, he gets a chance to redo. And so the book itself doesn't have a linear trajectory, it has a circular trajectory. And I use that device because I think that we all get second and third chances in our lives. I've had many of those, and I was trying to bring that into play here in fiction. So that's my example of using fate, because fate does take control of him. No matter where he's trying to run, he's being brought back to finish the unfinished business. All right, so at this point, before we jump into section number 3, I have a question from the audience, or a couple of questions from the audience. Let's ask that. And I think this one should be directed to you, Liz, because you talk about Florence, I think, in your book. And the question here is, why do we feel at home in a place we have never been to? For me, it was Florence, says the questioner. What do you think?
I think it's a clear signal that that's where you're meant to be. There's a great expression, follow the warmth. And if you feel cold in a place, then that's not the place for you. You have to feel a sense of warmth. It's a little bit, I'm sure we've all found it when we're looking for a house or we're looking for a flat. And it might meet all our expectations, but you just simply don't feel right in it. And a lot of cultures actually read the sensitivity of a place in order to find out if they're going to be happy there. So I think you're meant to be there. And if you feel that way in Florence, I would suggest you go back as often as you possibly can. If you can't even live there, what a glorious place it is. But yeah.
Well, thanks, Liz. Here's another question, not a question, more a statement, but I will direct it to Sharon, because it's to do with Sharon and how she lived in Toronto. The person says, I love the description of the house and life in Toronto in the book. Can you add something to that? What did that place do to you, Sharon?
It felt like home despite all the turmoil I went through in my life. There were good times too. And I can illustrate that by saying when I was married, my husband and I moved to Aurora, and I was there for 23 years, but I decided I had to move back to Toronto. So what does that say about me? I'm still in Toronto. I'm not in the house I grew up in, but I'm still in the east end of the city. I'm about 5 miles away from where I grew up. So that probably says that this is where I'm supposed to be, when I'm supposed to be, because how I decided to move here was I was looking, for some reason, I was looking at houses for sale in Toronto in July of 1998. And I saw some there. And so I went to a couple of open houses, and I met an agent there who also became a friend. And she helped me sell my house and helped me find the house I was going to. So there's a case of, you know, what Liz was talking about, where you're meant to be when you're there. But I love Toronto. I don't like some of the stuff that goes on it now, and I'm not going to go into what I don't like besides COVID. But I still love Toronto.
Good. Thank you, Sharon. Now we're going to go into theme number 3, which is, I think, the most interesting one. It's about fate and love. And in particular, the question is, are we destined to meet one particular person? So the significant partner in our lives, or some of us have had more than one partner in our lives, the significant person in our lives, are we destined to meet them through fate? So Liz, I'll start with you.
Well, I think very definitely yes. There is no way that I would have met my husband if it hadn't been the work of fate. I'll just tell you a brief anecdote on how we met. He's German, I'm British, in case that's not obvious. We both lived in Canada, but we met in Egypt. And we met because I had met someone there who wanted to go horseback riding with me. And but she changed her mind. So I was just about to leave the hotel and get a cab to the stables when she got a hold of me again and said, I've changed my mind again, I'm coming, wait for me, give me 15 minutes. And in the 15 minutes that I sat waiting for her, I met my husband. And of all things, he was carrying a riding crop. And why would he be carrying a riding crop in Egypt? Because he had just been to a market and they had thrown in the riding crop with something that he had bought. So he gave it to me on the understanding, of course, that I'd have to give it back to him. So if that wasn't some twisted sense of fate, I don't know what else. There's no other way I would possibly have met him. We lived in different cities in Canada, and just a weird story. So obviously that plays a big influence in what I've written. And fate and love plays a huge role in my novel. So the last section I'll read is where Rachel is now living with the painter, but increasingly she finds herself falling under the spell of her former lover. So she keeps returning to Egypt to see him. And they would spend many nights together in the desert stargazing, and helped along by some stimulants that he used to concoct to help them get close to the ancient world. And in this scene I'll read now, she's at home with the painter, but her mind is elsewhere. And I hope it demonstrates the intensity of certain relationships and the ones that you feel must surely have been destined. So Rachel sat alone in the living room, unable to focus on anything. Her mind drifted back again to her last trip to Egypt. Every night she and Carl had gone out to the desert to gaze at the stars and marvel at the mystical splendor of the night sky. The 10 years she'd spent away from him felt like a strange dream of someone else's life. He would hold her steady as they drank from the liquid in the silver flask. He had lost none of his intensity and gave himself up completely to the energy they created together. The images of him in this state spun through her head, the light of the stars in his eyes, his long hair swinging, his shirt hanging loose, his black pants rolled above his ankles, his feet moving lightly on the sand. This was the real soul of the man, the mystic, the adept. All those other things he did, the plotting of the heavens, the interpretation of the hieroglyphics, the crushing of the tonics and powders to help them feel closer to that ancient world, those were just vehicles for this finer being. And when he drew her close and they tumbled together on the blanket in the sand, there was nothing and no one in the world she wanted more. What was it that had taken her from the path she once chose, from this man who had been her lover, mentor, friend, soulmate? She lay back in the chair and drifted into sleep. Wasn't he just calling her home?
Good, thank you. Thank you. Now let's go to Sharon. So Sharon, talk about fate and love.
Okay, so sometimes when falling in love, fate is trying to send you messages, and you don't listen because you want to go on. I met the man I was going to marry and did marry in the workplace. It was my first job. I was a full-time secretary and he was a student that was there in the summer. So we became inseparable until he had to go back to university, which was in another province. So I was miserable. So I kept the railway company in business, I guess, going back and forth. But anyway, we did become engaged, and it was on getting ready for the wedding and connection with that fate had decided he, she, or it had to step in and make himself, herself, or itself known, but in subtle ways. We had an awful lot of problems getting things organized. At that point, both my parents had died, so it was up to us to do all the stuff that the parents would do, or at least the mother would do. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details about what happened, just business with flowers, with dresses, with invitations, with even the place for the reception. Things got all muddled up. But I wasn't listening to fate at all. And so he decided he would step in. I guess I consider him a he. He decided he would step in on the day of the wedding. Now, some of you may know the song "Get Me to the Church on Time," which Stanley Holloway sings in My Fair Lady. Well, I think fate was sort of playing around with that song with me. And I'm going to read the final reading here. I'm going to read something that happened on the way to the wedding for me. It illustrates how fate is playing a part with this song. My uncle, my godfather, who's supposed to drive the bridal party to the church and give me away, has still not arrived at the apartment. I glance from clock to watch to clock. Should we lift up our skirts and stroll over to the church? It is so close I can see it from the apartment living room window. However, the wedding party parading down the street midday on a Saturday in mid-November will stop cars just as I trip over my skirt. We decide to wait. I continue my clock watch staring and have added the apartment door to my surveillance. Finally, at 5 minutes after the wedding time of 1 p.m., my uncle buzzes from downstairs. He has dropped his wife and children off at the church and has come to pick up us, my two bridesmaids, my godmother, aunt, and myself. And the four of us take the elevator downstairs, climb into his car, and are off. But he doesn't drive to the front of the church. My uncle takes a detour into a side street and around a few blocks near the church. Where are we going? Did somebody move the wedding place and not tell the bride? My uncle finally slows down and parks the car right in front of the church. We go inside and the ceremony begins. I would later wonder if all these shenanigans were some sort of sign that marriage is more than a piece of wedding cake. Marriage is a journey, not all uphill, but certainly not an easy slide into happiness like the fairy tale ending in the movies that I like to watch. A marriage bumps, lurches, sways, tangles, and missteps. It is also harmony, satisfaction, restfulness, and togetherness. But most of all, it is a fluctuating learning climate that continues from the I do's to death, if you are lucky. But these happiness, hassles, and hazards that occurred in the wedding preparation, including why we moved the wedding up 6 months, should have rung some kind of bells besides wedding bells inside my head.
Thank you. All right, well, you took the plunge and whatever came with that came with it, right? I have a couple of questions. These are tricky ones. I don't know who to address this to. Maybe the first one goes to Liz. And the question here says, 50% of couples meet on a dating site. Fate? Hardly. But maybe you should click on and then it's not very clear. What is the fate part? Maybe you want to answer that.
Oh, gosh, that's a very, very tough one, because it's the old question, wasn't it really my decision? My argument is that even on a dating site, if there is a person on that site that you are meant to meet, that will be the one you connect with. That will be the one as you're scrolling through that you stop on. That will be the one where the coffee goes on for dinner, etc., as opposed to the one that ends in 5 minutes and it's as a terrible mistake. So whether it's through the internet or through chance meetings in foreign countries, I personally think that it is part of a bigger scheme. And if we try to push against it, somehow fate will find a way to get us back on track again. And that may well be through the internet.
So I have to agree with you on that. It's great getting on a dating site, but meeting a special person on the dating site, there has to be some business of fate in it. I'm a good example of that. I've been with my present wife for 17 years, and we met on a dating site. It was not a casual thing. But so that yes, I agree. Dating sites are great places to meet. It takes a lot of the hassle out. You don't have to go into bars anymore. But there is that element of who that special person is that is still in play, whether it's a dating site, a bar, a wedding, or any other social gathering. Question for you, Sharon. Maybe fate is just being open to taking a chance, like you did when you got married. And the person goes on to say, I think there's some hindsight involved in fate. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there is, because when I look back in a lot of things that happened into my life, I really wasn't directing what was going on, and somebody or something must have been, and so yeah, I think that's right. But the thing is, you don't always know at the time what's going on necessarily or why it's happening. And I'd like to add something to Liz's, because one of my philosophies comment on the dating site, because one of my philosophies is everything I think happens to you in your life for a reason. And you may not like the reason, and you may not know what the reason is till later on, but there is a reason for everything to happen. And just to add a little corollary here with my marriage, yes, it did end in divorce, but I got a wonderful son out of it, and we are very close, and he helps me a lot with a lot of my problems. And he has a wonderful partner, and I like her too. So I think something comes out of it. As far as my ex goes, we are friends now. It was a bitter breakup, but we are friends now, and we get along, and I get along with his current wife as well. So I think, like I say, everything happens for a reason in life.
Good. Well, thank you. So we've gone along and talked about fate in literature and now fate in life. And it seems like it's an inescapable, unavoidable thing. It's there. It's that silent third person in our lives who hangs around and moves the chairs around, right, and gets us to sit in them from time to time. Now, are there any other questions from the audience? I'm going to look around here again, see if there's anybody having a burning question on their mind. There's some nice comments, so I will leave both Liz and Sharon to go read the comments later on, but there are no more questions. So I'm going to try and wrap this up. I want perhaps let me get the gallery view up here so we can all of us see our audience, and then perhaps if Liz and Sharon, you hold your books up and show them what you have and what you've written and where you're drawing your information from. So go ahead. That's The Way Things Fall by Liz Torlée, and The Enemy is Within Us. Now just hold them up while I give a little commentary on them. The Way Things Fall by Liz Torlée is a work of fiction. It was published last year by Blue Denim Press. And The Enemy is Within Us is a memoir by Sharon A. Crawford, also published last year by Blue Denim Press. And they're available where all good books are sold. As you say, you can order it through your local bookstore. They're available on the online platforms of Amazon, Indigo, and Barnes & Noble, and wherever you want to go and buy online. Ebook versions are also available as Amazon Kindles and EPUBs on the Kobo platform. So they're available everywhere. I would encourage you to read them and support local authors. All right, well, thank you very much to Liz and to Sharon. And thank you, everyone who's been on the forum. I'll check one more time to see if there's any more questions. No, there aren't. So with that, I wish you all a good night, and hopefully you'll tune in for other sessions as we move into the new year. We'll be interviewing new authors, more authors, talking about more subjects in the realms of literature, and engaging in the conversation, because it's not just writing a book and publishing it. It's about having that engagement with the audience after they've hopefully read the book, even if they haven't, just talking about what books do to us in general, the writing of them and the reading of them. So thank you very much. With that, I'm going to say good night to everybody. You can say good night too. I mean, we're going to be signing off now. So good night, everybody.
Thank
you
you
very much.
Good night.